Hi, my name is Mike. I'm one of the pastors here at Kings Harbor, and thank you so much for utilizing this resource. Our hope for you in anything that we provide is that you would expect transformation, that we could demonstrate love towards you because of the love of God demonstrated to us, that you would have the faith stirred in you to deal with obstacles and to see opportunities, and that ultimately that the kingdom of God would be revealed in every area of your life. And so our hope with this resource is that the Lord would speak to you powerfully.
If you got a Bible, go with me to Matthew chapter 11. This Sunday is the first Sunday of a season called Advent. And so as we move into that, I want to, at least one of you is happy. The rest of you are like, But as we get ready to move into that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping in terms of kind of getting us all on the same page of what Christmas is going to look like here at Kings Harbor. And so a few things that I just want you to be mindful of. And so this morning, December the 3rd, will be fairly straightforward, normal service times, nothing extra, though we'll have a business meeting between services. I'll talk about that later. But then starting next week, the calendar may look a little bit different. So next Sunday is Celebration Sunday. Yeah, if you're new to Kings Harbor, or maybe you don't know what a Celebration Sunday is, that's the Sunday that was what we set aside once a quarter to celebrate new life through child dedication, through baptism, through people coming into covenant as part of being partners with the church. And so that's next Sunday. And when we do those Sundays, it is one service, one big celebration at 10 a.m. And so we want to invite you to be a part of that. Mark your calendars, mark your clocks, set an alarm, set another alarm, and then set an alarm on top of that to remember that it'll be a 10 o'clock start next week. And then usually after that service, we hang out and we have tacos. We're not going to do that next week because that evening we're going to invite you back for just a family celebration. Cookies, cocoa, carols, like anything else positive that starts with C probably might happen that night. I can't guarantee it. Like cash isn't going to be involved, but that is positive. It starts with C. And so this is an opportunity for you to jump in and hang and be part of the family. And so you can register for that. And then the final thing that I want to point you to, the 17th will be, again, a fairly straightforward weekend. And then on the 24th, that is Christmas Eve. So this last year and this year, because the holidays tend to fall on Sunday, we recognize that Christmas is a unique day. For some people, travel is required and movement is required. And so for us to understand how to best serve you and how to best have the best number of services, we're going to ask you to register ahead of time. We don't typically ask that for a Sunday, but it helps us to know, do we need to do one service or two? And so by you registering by Friday the 15th, it gives us the opportunity to know how many services that we need to have. And so even now you can see an opportunity to register at a QR code, or if you're watching online, you can go to kingsharbor.org/Christmas Eve, and you can register that way. And so a lot of things coming, a lot of things exciting. I want you to be informed and be a part of that. As we jump in this morning, I mentioned that it's the start of Advent. I think even Advent is a unique term that oftentimes, unless you've been in a church circle and particularly a high liturgy circle, the term Advent probably feels a little distancing. I talked about it a little bit last week, that it means the arrival of something, but I think more important than what the word means, it's the significance of the season. Oftentimes for us, when it comes to Christmas is this rushed blur of running to get something, running to be somewhere, running to do something, to get to this big event that a few days later we forgot what we got or we didn't like what we got. And so Advent is meant to shift something in us. But I have to confess to you, personally, now, let me say this. If my wife were in the room, she would say this is a lie and you shouldn't tell lies while you're preaching. I like Christmas. And so even this morning, my wife and Brianna were making fun of me because my boys were wearing like Christmas sweaters. My little one's got a dinosaur sweater on. My other one's got like a reindeer sweater on. And one says, have a roarsome Christmas. The other one was just a reindeer. And so Brianna was like, where's your Christmas sweater? And I was like wearing a black hoodie at the time. And I'm like, that's it. And they're like, you are the Grinch. For my birthday, my kid got me a Grinch mug with a bunch of Grinch tea because people don't believe that I like Christmas. I actually like Christmas a lot. But I'll tell you, it's difficult to preach. In fact, before I was in a lead pastor role, I always aspired, I can't wait till the day that I become a lead pastor and I can preach on Easter. I never was like, can't wait till I do an Advent series. Because Advent feels a little bit harder. And maybe the best way to ask it is this, like, what is the significance of Jesus being born? Now, obviously, there's a matter of sequence, right? Like, you've got to start so you can finish. You got to be born so you can die. But if all of it is that, okay, we just needed the order of events to happen in the right order, then it doesn't feel like it's all that significant. But it feels like that for Jesus to be born and to live amongst people for 33 years, that there's got to be something more significant than let's just get to the end of the story. And so for the next few weeks, I just want to wrestle through that. I think Paul writes in Colossians, and though it's not a Christmas text, and it's not even the text I'll be preaching this morning, I do think he says something to us that helps us to think about why is it significant that Jesus spent as much time as he did as a human. And so Colossians 1, verse 15 would simply say this: he's the image of the invisible God. There's something about knowing the nature of God that it was made more real, more tangible, more evident by the fact that Jesus existed amongst people. And so what I want to do as we walk through this series, and the title of the series is just going to be called Gentle and Lowly, taken from both the book by Dane Ortlund, but also from the text that we'll read this morning, that Jesus is just showing the character of God by the way that he lived. And it's not just that he needed to be born so that he could die, but he needed to be born and to be human, that we might get a better picture of who our God is. And so our main idea this morning, Advent refocuses our attention on the rest and peace, not rest in peace, rest and peace. That'd be a really unfortunate mistake if I made that, found in trusting Jesus. So what we'll do is we'll be in Matthew chapter 11, and we're just going to walk through verses 25 through 30. We're going to see a picture of a God who wants to be known, and then an invitation to know both his heart and his rest. Let's pray together, and we'll jump in. So Jesus, thank you. Thank you that you are the image of the invisible God, that you are the radiance of his glory, the exact imprint of his nature, that we don't have to guess about who you are or what you look like or how you feel towards us, but you put it perfectly on display. And so in a season that may want to turn our attention to so many other things, would you help us to put our eyes upon you and see the beauty of who the Father is, because we've been introduced to the Son. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 25 would say this: At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, because this was your good pleasure. All things have been entrusted to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except for the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son desires to reveal him. Now, it's important that you know a little bit of the pretext. If we had time this morning, we could read the whole chapter, and it's a unique chapter with all that's in it. But right before this, Jesus is actually speaking this rebuke to particular cities, and his rebuke for those cities is, you had more than enough evidence to see who I was, and yet you rejected me. And so it's this clear picture of it's not lack of exposure, it's not lack of revelation, it was somehow lack of acceptance that kept them, they chose to reject what was being made plain for them. And then he makes this shift and he says, and this is the work of God, that praise be to my Father, because he has hidden it from some, he's hidden it from the wise and the intelligent. And I want to be careful here, because I think if we're not careful, what we're going to hear is that human wisdom and intelligence is bad. Jesus isn't mad at your IQ score. But what is important here is that the attempt of human wisdom and human intelligence without the gift of God's Spirit leading us into knowing him will not get to the goal. And so he makes this stark contrast between those who are wise and intelligent and infants. If you know anything about infants, infants are vastly dependent on others. Infants do nothing for themselves. Some of you, if you're in that season of life of having an infant or recently removed from having an infant, I can't tell this any better than you. They need you for everything. They need you to eat. They need you to sleep. They need you to change. They need you to roll them over so they can see whatever it may be. Like, you are doing everything for them. And so this contrast that Jesus is intentionally making is for the world to know God, that it's not going to be by our own ability, though our ability is not being denigrated here. But what he's saying is that it's impossible without God's kindness, without his Spirit showing you who he is. And then I just want to wrestle with something that Jesus says. He says that no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except for the Son, and those who the Son has the desire to reveal him to. This is a really exclusive claim. Jesus is saying that if you want to know who the Father is, that if the Father is going to be revealed, that it's going to have to come through me. This is the type of claim that puts Jesus in a place where you got to do something with him. Right now in our home, we're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We're not very far into it. Some of you are like, yeah, that's my stuff. Thank you for not making a sports reference. Don't worry, it's coming. And so there's a moment where Peter and Susan in the lion, look, I'm not even worried about spoiler alerts. At this point, the book's been around forever. It's on you. So there's a point where Peter and Susan are talking with the professor, the person that owns the house, because Lucy and the other brother, I forget his name, Edmund, they had gone into the wardrobe and they'd come back out, and Edmund was basically pretending that Lucy had lied. And so Peter and Susan are really concerned because they're like, Lucy really believes this. Edmund's saying that it's not true. And so they go to the professor and like, we're worried because either she's lying or she's insane. And so the professor asked the question, well, is it the practice of Lucy to lie? Like, if you're going to pick between Edmund and Lucy and who's going to tell the truth, and like without hesitation, they're both like, oh yeah, we believe Lucy. So we don't think she's lying, but we actually are a little worried that she might be sick. And he said, well, that's easy to solve. Look at her. Does she seem insane to you? And they're like, well, no. And he's like, well, maybe there's a third option. What if it's true? And I just want to take a moment in this text that Jesus is making the statement that nobody can see the Father unless they see it through him, that he is the entryway into it. And some are going to look at him and say, you're a liar. But when I look at all that Jesus said and did, it doesn't seem to be the tendency for Jesus to lie. And when I look at what Jesus did and just the Gospels, just the historical narrative of what he does, he doesn't seem like a person that's insane. You don't get that much done in 3 years and be a little bit off your rocker. So he doesn't seem like he's a liar, and he doesn't seem like he's out of his mind. And that points to, what if this is true? What if he is what he's saying to be true, that the way that you get to know God is to know me and to see me, and that I am showing you who he is because that's my desire and good pleasure to do so. And then I just want to look at the language of the text. I told you the text before has all this language of rebuke. Woe to this city, woe to that city, woe to these people. It's a lost opportunity, missed opportunity. And yet this language is things like, praise what you're doing, Father. It's language like, this is your good pleasure. It's language like desire. The tone of the text is not that God is begrudgingly like, I guess I have to let them get to know me. I guess we've got to that point in human history where I can't be anonymous anymore. That the language that Jesus is using is that the only way to get to the Father is through me, and he's glad to do this. Like, I just want to start there, that when we are entering into a season like Advent, where it's about the expectation of the arrival of Christ, both the first one that's already happened and the second one that is to come, that we don't have a God that's hiding behind a rock not wanting to be known, but he wants us to know him. And so I wrote it this way. The arrival of Jesus is not just a functional necessity, though it does accomplish something and though it is necessary. He's an expression of God's glad-hearted desire to be known. Now, if that's true, then how do we get to know him? And I think the text that comes right after is really important, because Jesus would say in verse 28, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, I think verse 28 is this summary statement of come to me, get to know me, be near to me, and find rest. And so what I want to do is I just want to take a couple of moments and talk about this is what we are getting to learn about the character of God. And this is what we're getting to learn about the rest that he provides. So one of the things that's interesting is you need to understand a yoke. We don't use yoke language, but if you've been around the church or been around the farm, you might understand of yoke as a mechanism that's used oftentimes when it comes to animals to bond animals together that they could share the burden of a load. But there's also human yokes that were for a singular person. But the meaning of the yoke wasn't to just make things more difficult. It was actually to make the burden lighter. It was meant to help you carry that burden. Now, oftentimes, the idea of somebody having to put on a yoke, usually people aren't volunteering for yokes. Usually animals aren't walking up and saying, hey, go ahead and put this big, heavy thing on me so I can carry your stuff. But it was often a sign of either a servitude role or oftentimes slavery or oppression. So now we've got this conflicting idea because you desire for us to know you. You're giving me this invitation to come, and yet you're putting this work apparatus on my shoulders and saying that it's supposed to give me rest. And I think it's important that you know that what makes a yoke easy, what makes a burden light is not the apparatus, but it's actually who you're carrying it for. It's actually the character of the master that defines whether it's a good burden or a bad burden, a heavy burden or a light burden, an unfair burden or a due burden. Like that actually has less to do with the apparatus and more to do with the person that is asking you to carry it. And then what Jesus would tell us is that when you take my yoke upon you, that you get to learn from me and know that I am lowly and humble is what the first version we read. But here's how it sounds in the ESV. This is where we get the title for the series. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. I think that's interesting because the words used there for gentle and lowly are often the words used of somebody of low status. One of the other times that the word gentle is used is 1 Timothy chapter 6. It's the passage right after don't be lovers of money. And Paul's listing out all these things that he wants Timothy to be. And one year I was preaching at our men's retreat. And when I was preaching that text. And I got to gentleness. And nobody in the room jumped up and started pounding the chest. Gentleness, right? Like when we hear gentle, we certainly don't think of it as a quality of strength. We like our fabric softener to be gentle, but we don't like our heroes to be gentle. And so what does this mean? Especially like if it's about some level of not having power, or if it has something to do with not having low status, how can you say that all things have been given to you by the Father? You just said that earlier. How do you have all things? How do we go through a series like The Kingdom where it feels like almost every passage at the end of it that he's sitting in this place of authority, being able to judge, being able to separate the wheat from the weeds, or sitting and being able to discern the sheep from the goats, and sitting on the glorious throne as the Son of Man? Like if you're that guy, how can you say you're gentle and lonely? Maybe we need to go back to the previous point. Are you lying to us, Jesus, or have you lost your mind? But this has nothing to do with position. It has to do with posture of heart. Because there are people who have low status, low agency, low power that are the most ungentle people that you've ever met. And there's a picture of Jesus who has clearly said, with all that you've seen me do, that you should see God himself in the actions that I'm doing. And yet at the same time, but if you want to know about my heart is gentle and it's lowly. Both Dane Ortland, and if you haven't read the book, Gentle and Lowly, you've heard it oftentimes when Tim is leading confession, both would point to that this is the only time in all the scriptures that Jesus describes his own heart. I did not do the research to find out if that's true, but if you're going to stake your claim on your book on that, it probably is. And so if he is the image of the invisible God and he's trying to display God's heart for you, the fact that the only time that he would describe what the heart is like is to say that though I have power, I use that power in a way that could be described as gentle. Though I have status, the way that I associate with you is lowly. Says something about the character of God. The way he leads is with gentleness and lowliness in his heart. And then how does this create rest? The exact same verses, they're replete with all this language about the character of God, but there's also this call multiple times to receive rest for your souls, to receive a yoke that's easy and a burden that's light. Like it seems to be this invitation over and over again that I'm helping you to carry something more differently than what you know. That actual language of finding rest for your souls is actually an analogy or an allusion back to a text in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 6:16 would say this. This is what the Lord says. Stand by the roadways and look. Ask about the ancient paths. Which is the way to what is good? Then take it and find rest for yourselves. But they protested, we won't. And so this is Jeremiah actually speaking the words of God to the people of God at that time, right as they're getting ready to go into exile. And he's saying, like, there's this moment where standing before God, like he's saying, look and find what's good. Walk in the ancient paths. And when you go that way, you'll find rest for your souls. And that language of finding rest for your souls, like the word that comes there is it's like psyche. It's what we would think about as your internal being. It's this deep level of rest. What Jesus is talking about here is not inactivity. Because many of us know that you can do very little and still be exhausted. When was the last time that you binged your favorite show on Netflix and stayed up way too late and said, that's all right, I don't need my coffee in the morning. I didn't do much, I just watched the show. Inactivity is not the same thing as rest, and certainly physical inactivity is not necessarily restorative to your soul. But what Jesus is getting at here, in fact, it feels like it should be an oxymoron, that you're telling me to carry a burden. And I think we often think, I talked about the distinction between an animal burden and a human burden, because I think we like to think about the warmness of being yoked to Jesus. That Jesus is going to come alongside me and he's going to help me carry it. But R.T. France, who's smarter than me, would make the argument that if this is a conversation about a human yoke, it's not Jesus carrying for you what you should carry for yourself, but it's Jesus by his wisdom helping you carry it in a way that doesn't exhaust you. In fact, this is what Jesus would say, is that take on my yoke and learn from me. Learn what I'm telling you and put it into practice. This is why he quotes Jeremiah, that I'm showing you the way, but the difference between receiving rest and not receiving rest is whether you're going to take it, whether you're going to obey it, whether you're going to use it. He would say that what I'm offering you is an opportunity to have this yoke that eases the burden that you've been trying to carry without it. And then he would say that this particular yoke, that it's easy and it's light. And the language around easy is that it can be kind, it can be gracious, it can also be suitable or well fit. And I actually think it needs to be both. It needs to be both well fit for us, but it also needs to be a burden that we can carry. And I just want you to hear the mercy in that. Because if it's one without the other, it's not really all that helpful. If I came in here and said, hey, I need to move 1,000 pounds. And so I bought you this designer backpack that's got really soft shoulder pads, and I put all this weight in the backpack. You don't care how well it fits you, the burden's too heavy. But at the same time, if I say, hey, we've got to move all this weight, and I figured out a way where we can make it light for you, but the apparatus that you're going to have to use is going to make it impossible for you to walk. It's not well fit or suitable for you. What Jesus is making a promise is that this is both suitable for you, that this yoke is easy, that it's well fit for you, that I know you well enough, that I understand you well enough to build this rightly that you can carry it, but it's also a burden that you can actually carry. That if this call is to learn from him and walk in the ways that he's leading, that this call to being obedient followers of Jesus is not a burden that's too heavy for us to carry. And he, by his grace, is giving us the wisdom, if we will take it, to learn how to receive rest in the obedience he's called us to. True rest is found when we trust the character of God enough to accept Jesus' leadership over our lives. So I want to go back to our main idea. Advent refocuses our attention on the rest and peace found in trusting Jesus. And as I say that, some of you laugh because you're like, I don't feel rested at all in this season. I don't know what you're talking about. So I think it's hard for us to receive rest. And I want to take a couple of moments and wrestle through why that is. And so I think there's two reasons. I think one is that we question his character, and the other is we question our belonging. So I wrote it this way. The invitation to rest is difficult to receive because we don't know his character. I have a friend named John Griffith. John is in vocational ministry. John's brother is in vocational ministry. John's dad is in vocational ministry. And so growing up, oftentimes when his dad was speaking somewhere, he would go, and he was in a situation where his dad was speaking, and there was a moment of an altar call, and they called people forward, and John came forward. And so his dad was praying for people, and his dad was anointing people with oil, and he ran out of oil. So he turned to one of his friends, and he said, hey, can you grab me some oil? I'm going to pray for my son John, and I want to anoint him. So he ran to go get the oil, came back. His dad puts some on his thumb, puts it on John's head, and he begins to pray. And so John said, as he tells the story, he's like, man, I'm praying, and it began to tingle a little bit. He's like, but I've been never anointed with oil before. Maybe this is what happens. It's like, maybe the Lord's doing something here. And so he continues to pray, and then it moves from tingling to like a slight burning. And he's like, oh, the Lord's after me. And so John starts confessing sin out loud. Because it's like it's burning, and like people are backing away from him. His dad's like, let the fire fall. And so at some point, he's like, no, Dad, like my forehead is on fire. And so come to find out, it wasn't olive oil, it was cinnamon oil. And apparently your skin doesn't like that. And so when John tells that story, it's hilarious, but then I've heard him tell it multiple times, but he said, but it wasn't until recently that it said something about how he perceived the character of God. That his automatic assumption is that if God was going to do something, it was going to be painful and wrathful in his life. And why would you ever accept the invitation from somebody that you think wants to harm you? Why would you ever accept the invitation from somebody who you think that their whole MO is to somehow crush you and burn you and destroy you? But what Jesus is saying here, and yes, there is judgment that comes from the Lord. I'm not negating that. But what I am saying is the invitation here, the invitation for those who are to know Jesus, the invitation for those who are weary and burdened is to come and know that there's a glad-hearted God that wants to be known, and he's showing himself through Jesus. And Jesus is saying, come, know my character and receive rest. And I'll tell you, if the first challenge is that we question his character, the second challenge is that we question if we belong. During the Christmas season, I'll go home to Oklahoma City and spend time with my family, and then a few days after that, we'll drive down to San Antonio and we'll spend time with Sky's family. And when I go to my parents' house, I have not lived there in nearly 20 years. But I'm going to walk up in that joker like I own the place. If I still had a key to the front door, I wouldn't even ask for permission. I wouldn't even ring the door, but I'd walk in, throw my stuff around. Like, I don't ask for permission to eat anything in the fridge. I don't know who it's for. I don't even care. I'm eating it. Get mad when I go to my parents' house because I'll hear the noise of a dishwasher, and all growing up, we never had a working dishwasher, and then I move out and they get one. Like I feel some kind of way about it because I feel like I should have some percentage in that dishwasher. When I go to my in-laws, I ask permission for everything. and feel the need. Like, I've been married for 12 years, dated Sky 5 years before that. It's like 17 years, half of her life, I've been part of her life. And still feel like I need to make myself useful when I'm there, prove my worth. Like, I'm trying to fix stuff that doesn't need to be fixed. Like, just because as much as I know that they love me, I'm still not 100% sure that I belong. And so there's this reality that we feel that. And I talk about that humorously, but let me talk about it more seriously. I can remember being a little boy in kindergarten, and we were playing the game I Spy. And as we were playing the game I Spy, like kids were like, I spy something blue, I see the sky, yeah, it's the sky. I spy something yellow, oh, it's the, I don't know, big bird picture on the wall. I have no idea what it was. Then at one point we're playing I Spy, and somebody's like, I spy something brown. And I was like, the desk, the door, the chalkboard. No, it's you, silly. And it was the first time that I realized that I was other. And then there were just these moments in life that would come up that I would realize, I don't know that I feel like I fit here. I was with our students on Wednesday night, and I was telling them I can remember being the kid in the back of youth group. And my distance from the Lord had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with, I don't belong with these people. I don't fit. I can remember I was in first grade. I could read, but I was not gifted at reading out loud. I was intimidated by it because I was like, if I mess up, I don't belong here, and they're going to make fun of me. And so it just kept delaying me reading out loud, even though I had the ability. I read all the time at home, but I was afraid that I was going to just prove how much more I didn't fit. And so I just kind of sat silent for a long time, not being able to do what I actually was capable of doing because I didn't fit. I know this feels like I'm laying down on your couch and we're starting a therapy session, so if you need to get out your notepad, get out your notepad. I can remember most of my friends now who are in vocational ministry, they knew the call of God in their life coming out of high school. And so they would jump up, and they jumped up and went to Bible college. And I went to the University of Oklahoma because I was going to get a marketing degree and then go to law school and become a sports agent. And so I was already behind the 8 ball when I realized what the Lord was calling me to, and felt this level of insecurity and lack of belonging. So to cover it up, I would read and listen and learn and try and do all the things to prove myself worthy enough to be in the place. All these years later, I was sitting with a young man from our church who came to just kind of know a little bit more about me and know a little bit more about my church. And he asked me the question, hey, where'd you go to seminary? And I was like, I didn't. And he broke the ice by like, so is this like a Good Will Hunting type thing? I was like, yes, I break into seminaries in the middle of the night and write long theological treatises that nobody else can figure out. And we laughed about it. But while he was laughing inside, I'm like, is this dude questioning everything that I've ever said because I haven't proved myself to have done enough to belong? And it becomes really hard to rest when you feel like you need to earn your spot. And some of us, it's not that we're hearing Jesus say, come and find rest, and we don't believe it. We just say that when you say, come and find rest, that it may not be for me. That I've sinned too much, that I've failed too much, that I'm the wrong category of person, that I don't fit here. And so how could I ever possibly find a way to rest? And so if I don't belong, I'm going to earn my spot and prove that I deserve to be here because I've done enough and I've been to enough things and I've learned and I held my hand at the right angle during worship and I clapped on beat. Like I proved that I deserve to be here. You're exhausted. And then any time that we hear an invitation into something, it's not an invitation into the rest and the character of God. It's another invitation to be reminded why we don't belong, and so we've got to do more, and so we've got to try harder, and we are worn out. And the invitation from Jesus is, come, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. And some of you are struggling even now as I say that to believe it to be true. This is not expressly biblical, but I think it is helpful. There's a woman named Brene Brown. I often talk about people that are smarter than me. She is definitely in that category. And she often talks about that we mistake the order of operations between trust and vulnerability. So what we think is, when you prove that you're trustworthy, then I'll be vulnerable with you. But she says, but the reality is that you start by being vulnerable. And that word vulnerable comes from the Latin. It actually means to be woundable. It means to let somebody in close enough, to have them near enough to you that you could be wounded by them. And if the reason that Jesus was born wasn't just to die, but to show you the glad-hearted desire of God to be known, to know his character, to know his heart, and to know his rest, though you can't receive that from a distance. And some of us in our worship life, we've never been close enough to trust him. We've been waiting for him to prove his trustworthiness, his character, but we know that he's not a liar, and we know that he's not a lunatic, and so maybe this invitation is true. Maybe his character is true. Maybe his rest really is available, but the only way that you know is that you get close enough that it might not work out. The only way that you know is that you get close enough, that you stop performing and stop trying to strive and actually lean into resting. And I'll just tell you, particularly in this season, we can be busy with a million church things. We just walk through all the stuff that's happening in December and never be near Jesus at all. So my heart for you and my heart for me is, if you are exhausted, to come near to Jesus. Maybe you have nothing to offer. Good. Maybe you don't have anything left in the tank to perform. He's not asking you to. Maybe the rest in that area of your life that you've been trying to hide and perform and manufacture, he's just saying, just let it be seen. And trust me that with my wisdom, I'll help you carry that burden. Can I even caution you in this season? Oftentimes what happens is there's so many things going on, so many holiday parties, so many events, that the thing that gets pushed to the side is personal time with Jesus, or entering into church, or spending time with those who are in close community with you that would keep you accountable and keep focusing your attention on Jesus. And I'm longing in this season that we would know our gentle and lowly Savior who desires to be known all the more, and that we wouldn't put him to the side because we either don't trust his character or we can't slow down and rest. So, Father, I know enough of what's in this room to know that this text wasn't accidental. I'm not a person that says this was a good year or a bad year, but I know that there are enough people who faced enough difficulty that has worn them out enough this year that they are on fumes on December 3rd, thinking, how am I going to make it through everything that Christmas requires of me? And so, Lord, I pray that we would move close enough to you, that we'd be vulnerable enough with you and with those who are going to point us towards you, that at the end of the day, we would know that your promises are true, your character is good, and your rest is available. So, Lord, I long that as we move even into a time of communion and a time of worship, that people would see it as an opportunity to move near, to confess things that are maybe keeping them a step back from you because they're afraid if you knew that about them that they wouldn't belong, or that if other people knew that about them that they wouldn't belong. People who are deathly afraid that if they slowed down and stopped performing that people would recognize that they shouldn't be here. And Lord, I pray that even what we'll do in the next few moments will bring rest to their hearts, and that they'll know you all the more deeply. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short Connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.